All right, hey everybody, welcome back to the show with no name. Let's not use that too often because then that might stick, and we will have to keep that as the name going forward. But welcome back
Hey,
to kind of a
there are worse
yeah.
names out there than that.
It does have a bit of an edge to it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so this is kind of our second episode. Jack and I are getting together every week to kind of talk about the major sort of shifts and trends happening in the world of video marketing, really specifically focusing on the intersection of brands and creators and kind of where we see video marketing heading in the future here. And so I think this episode, we want to kind of, I would say, explore like the foundations of like video marketing or a really key sort of tenet that we think is going to be important going forward. And I will say up front, it probably seems a little bit tropey, but stay with us because I don't think this is your standard sort of like video marketing is the future sort of podcast. We're going to go really deep on I think some specific aspects of like why is video extremely sort of interesting today, and that might actually be an interesting place to start. Is
hmm
this trope, right? Like video marketing has sort of been it's been listed as like a top marketing trend for like the past 10 years, I would say. And
Yeah.
one has to wonder like if something is trending or if something is sort of the future of something for 10 years. Are we like at what point do we arrive? Like we've been on a long sort of we've been on
Yeah.
sort of a long climb here, right? Um so I think that the to answer that question, the truth is like we kind of have arrived, certainly in a way. Like it's definitely people are definitely stretching this like sort of definition of a trend when they say like, oh, video marketing is going to come into its own. I mean, we're there. Like video,
Yeah.
extremely important. You know, the most important, honestly, channel we would argue. But I think like there have been some kind of like macro shifts, I would say, in the world of marketing that have you and I feeling like we actually need to go further than that as like the declaration or that as like the point of view. And so I found a phrase or I saw a phrase recently. This may be used elsewhere, but I do want to give credit to John Bonini, a marketing consultant on LinkedIn, as being the first person to use this where I saw it, which was the phrase anchor medium. And so I think you and I kind of agree that it's no longer video marketing is the future. It's actually a case around should video marketing actually be the anchor medium for your
Mm.
entire content strategy.
Yeah.
And so that really, I think, is like the heart of the conversation today. Not like does video marketing matter? We'll have some, I think, anecdotes, data points that, frankly, just like prove that inarguably. But I think way more interesting for teams is like, do we actually make video the the anchor medium, the central medium, the one medium where sort of like the rest of our organic marketing, our content strategy sort of revolves around? And I
hmm
think that actually is an interesting question because, content marketing for so long really was like equated with like blog post. And if not,
Yeah.
if you want to be a little more generous, then like, well, let's say text content, right? um, so content, if you're in a good mood and would like to be generous with it, but blog post is really what like blogging and content marketing in the early years was like, they were synonyms. They were like the same thing essentially.
Yeah.
Um, so that has kind of like wildly changed. So yeah, I think the place to start is like when we say anchor medium. And Jack, I would love your take on this too, but I kind of define like anchor medium as like we start with this format or this
Yeah.
medium, and then we sort of try to find to make we find ways to make the other mediums that we're going to invest in work around it. Um,
hmm
and so I think like it's essentially sort of picking the medium and adding like first. It's like a video first content strategy,
Right.
uh, where the long form content's probably going to be thought of as like how do we do it in video, and then how do we maybe repurpose it or atomize it to other formats. But would love to get like a sense of like how kind of are you defining it? How do you see it when we think about anchor
Yeah.
medium?
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're saying is exactly right, but I think just in to give it like a real world, tangible, I don't know, something to compare to, I kind of
Yeah.
think of it as like sort of like you've been saying, it's like for this past 10 years, people have been like, oh, you need to like invest in video. But I think a lot of companies, really, to them, that has just meant like, okay, we'll hire an agency to make like one video every once in a while, or we will, like add, on the website, like a moving animation or something.
Yeah.
Whereas like it hasn't, like I don't feel like until recently that many companies have like stepped into that we should be creating video content weekly and often like in-house, and focus on that being the main thing that we consistently produce, as opposed to like video matters. Like I feel like that's how it used to be these past, or started to be like that some years ago, but now it's like it's not just video matters, it's like if you're not using video, you're being left behind. And so I think a lot more companies are finally figuring that out and latching on to that idea. And so I feel like that, to me, is like what makes an anchor medium, is like it's consistent. And I think that's the main thing, is like you are prioritizing putting out content frequently, and it doesn't have to be necessarily like the most, highly produced, perfect quality.
Right.
I think a lot of like in order to make it, for a lot of brands, your anchor medium, you sort of have to like let go of that pressure, I
That's a
think.
great point. Yeah.
Because you can't, like, if you are to be able to make video your anchor medium and be producing it consistently, and you don't have many millions of dollars to be spending on just video marketing, like you're gonna have to sort of let go, and
Pick a
just
quality level. Yeah.
and
Stick to
pick a
it.
quality
Yeah.
level. And so I think that's where a lot of companies are at now, is figuring out how to adopt that attitude and create video at a fast pace that still feels in line with like their brand quality guidelines.
Yeah, that's a great point. And honestly, I think that could be partially the driver of like why has everyone been kind of saying that video is like a big future investment in a lot of like marketing surveys. It's always the number one channel of we're going to invest more next year, and that's kind of the funny thing of like it's been at the top of that list for 10 years.
Yeah.
But I think you're getting at it like probably one of the bigger drivers, which is like people are doing kind of, in the past, they were doing minimum amounts of video and then like just checking off like, well, we invested in video.
Right.
But like realizing
exactly.
maybe now like it wasn't enough. And another point I really liked that you made was like investing more in video is not like the end game is not always, and actually probably rarely is, like film grade levels of video production. It's actually just like, center the content strategy around it, invest consistently in ways that other brands like won't. And frankly, like go the distance, like stick with it longer than other companies are maybe willing to. So that's great. I think that's a great sort of baseline to start with. Like when we say what's an anchor medium, like what has kind of been the trajectory of video. And I think for the rest of the episode, I'd love to get into like, honestly, it's a bit of a case that we would like to make. I think we're mostly going to explore what we're seeing, but like we start definitely from the point of view of like, you should seriously consider having video as your anchor medium. It's not necessarily for every brand, certainly. But I think there's a number of reasons. There's a number of things happening in the backdrop in kind of the world of marketing that make now like a more interesting time than ever to consider it. And I think one of the maybe most timely, like it's kind of, we're kind of in a weird, I would say, stasis with like marketing and specifically tech companies, maybe even B2B broadly, of like, is the economy massively affecting things anymore? Like, kind of, sort of, like, certainly I think like the job listings are not what they sort of used to be in terms of like how frequently marketing jobs are going up. I think hopefully for people's sake, like the sort of layoff concern has like dropped hopefully a little bit, but so we're in kind of like, we're definitely not in like marketing's previous 2-year heyday. But I think something that's like going to stick with us, like regardless of sort of the hiring landscape, is companies really wanting their marketing dollars and their to go further. And I think they'll start to look towards, organic content to really pick up the sort of torch there. Um, and I think like that also then prompts this conversation of like, well, how do we build like a content engine that takes certain formats, certain content, uh, kind of final products and like really gets a lot of like mileage out of them.
Yeah.
But is also like considerate to the audience and is not just some like copy paste of one thing and you see it everywhere for a week and that's it. So
Yeah.
I would not call this like strictly content repurposing. Um, I think for those of folks that don't know the kind of distinction between like repurposing, atomization, like repurposing is more strictly like how do we just work with a piece of content that we made and stick with what we actually produced and get it to work on another platform. Whereas like atomization is more how do we take this like idea, this concept that we came up with for a certain content type, and then actually create something new. But we don't have to start from scratch with like the idea, but we will actually tailor fit it by creating something new for another platform, right?
Yeah.
And I would say that leads us to like our first, I stand before the jury. Like the first argument I would make, Your Honor, is that like video is like the best medium to build this like content engine, this like repurposing plus atomization sort of like engine.
Yeah.
And I think that's like one of the reasons is it's strictly because like it is the medium that you either have to use or that works best across all of these sort of like emerging channels. You and I have discussed before, and we could probably go even deeper on a future episode here, but podcast is one example. Like there is really like there are very few exceptions, for a brand to like create a podcast and not do it with video.
Yeah.
Podcasts are like notoriously hard to grow, especially because like podcast platforms don't give you a lot of built-in distribution, whereas YouTube and video platforms absolutely, yeah. I mean, the iTunes team is like but yeah, like, and then like not only does sort of like YouTube or sort of other video hosting platforms, not only are they generally better for the actual like long form show, but as everybody knows, like the clips are what really drive growth for podcasts. And so that's one example of like you almost have to do video. Like you have better distribution for the actual main format of the show, the long form recording. And then you just have like so much more flexibility with like, where can we take these clips? And the answer is honestly like almost anywhere that your customer is, right?
Yeah.
So that is a huge sort of value add of video. Is just like you have so many options, way more options, and way more flexibility to both repurpose or atomize content, whereas text is a little more challenging. Text is often where a lot of content starts. Like even if something's going to ultimately be a video, you might script it first or at least like outline. Yeah. So like text still has a ton of value, I think, in like this sort of repurposing or atomization engine. But it's hard to strictly like take text elsewhere. Like
it's not like, I don't know. I feel like it's also easier with a video. You can create a video and create a text post out of a video, but you can't necessarily take a text post and turn that into a video. That's
certainly not
engaging.
as easily.
I feel like, it's not like an equal two-way street. So I think, starting with video is definitely, I think, the best idea. I think that's also like to your point, like repurposing video, it is the most important thing. And I don't know, because I think in a lot of ways, video, the scary thing, I think the reason some companies might feel either that they want to make video the anchor medium, but like can't figure out how to actually make that happen, or just like are a little scared to do that, is because it probably, I mean, it's a big time investment. It takes a lot of time to create a video from scratch. But then once that video is done, it's way easier to turn that one video into something for everywhere. So in a way, you're like dividing that amount of time by 5 if you can post it on 5 different places. So I think it's like a scary thing for people or for companies at first to like want to invest in to the extent that maybe is necessary, but you kind of just have to like get past that and remember that, yeah, this is an investment for not just one platform, but for everywhere. Yeah.
I think that's totally true. And I think we actually have, we saw some data recently from, I believe this was Wistia and HubSpot doing a report together here on like how do marketers kind of share content across platforms. And so repurposing was like, it was definitely the most popular at like 46%. I think it was like maybe 19% of folks said they do both like repurposing and like atomization kind of equally. So I think though, like an important point to raise about this is like, yes, you know, repurposing is kind of like the most popular way to build your sort of engine, your sort of like make content go further. I think an important call out though is like, you cannot be lazy about this. Like we know the benefits because, for instance, when we look at our content calendars, you know, we're able to see, for instance, the videos you make. If we consider all the places that they're going to go, the output is like so much. It's often like quite a bit higher than text. But we have like, you know, we have kind of like boundaries that we have to draw up here, which is like, if this is not going to fit the platform, or if it's not going to fit the kind of presence that we want for Kapwing's brand to like have on that platform, then don't force fit it. Like don't force it to work. But I think if you kind of hold yourself to like a, you know, higher standards really for your customer's sake of just like, hey, we're not going to like sort of force feed you this format or this style that really doesn't work on this platform. It's really not what you're looking for. I still think you can be sort of pretty ambitious or aggressive with repurposing, but that's one of the reasons why like atomization, I think has to be part of the mix. Because when you have that really great core idea, we know customers and prospects like really resonate with this. It really worked somewhere else that we published it, but let's not kind of shoot ourselves in the foot here by trying to take that exact piece of content and just like forcing it on a platform where it's just not going to go anywhere. And then kind of like a lot of people throwing their hands up or shrugging us like, well, why didn't this work? It worked over here. Why didn't it work here? Well, you have to make that strategic call of like, oh, it'll do great even if we move it 1-to-1, or in order for this to perform again, we've got to kind of revisit it. We've got to kind of like touch it up, edit it, or just kind of re-record and reproduce it entirely. So I like this data because I just think it shows like you do have to have some rigor and some strategy to repurposing, and not just kind of blindly think you're going to create this conveyor belt of like create once and just like literally copy and paste everywhere, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes it's honestly, it's like aggravating to figure that out, because I feel like you only figure that out firsthand, you know, until someone like hearing us say that is like, yeah, totally. But then once you actually do it, it's hard to sometimes figure that out. Like I'm just thinking back to, like I run this show right now just sort of for fun, and it's kind of like a podcast. And so we make clips all the time, and yeah, like on TikTok, we got this video that like, you know, did well over 1 million views, and then we posted on YouTube Shorts and it gets like 200, and it's like, what? Like, what is the difference here? And on Instagram, like it's completely different. And so, yeah, I think a lot of it, you sort of just have to, and this is again, like why I think a lot of companies are a little afraid to start with video, is because they don't know exactly the video strategy straight from the get. I think a lot of it, you have to like just figure it out for yourself. You like kind of do have to post everywhere and just see how different audiences react to the same type of content to get a better idea of that knowledge. And then I think a lot of companies are afraid that like things won't look, you know, prim and proper and perfect, and like they won't have a perfect strategy straight from the jump. And but I think in some ways like that's a risk you kind of have to take when you're diving into video, is sort of taking these risks, posting content that may not perform super well. And yeah, but also then once you have that understanding, definitely tailoring content to each platform is a really important thing.
That's a great point. And I think like I'm always like making notes of like data I wish I could see that would probably be hard to like poll people on or get. But one I'm gonna put a pin in for this conversation is like I wonder if with most companies you see the distribution of repurposing versus atomization um, start or maybe it should start really heavily with repurposing and kind of slowly add
Yeah.
atomization or like tailoring the content over time. I think it'd be really interesting to poll, for instance, like startups, especially, and to like if you could map over their year-long investment in video. To your point, maybe they should start very heavily with repurposing. Just try, the content everywhere, and then you're getting really valuable data back. As like, oh, this doesn't really work when we port it over one to one,
Yeah.
or this really does work when we kind of port it over one to one, and then you can kind of adjust your investment in either just like clipping, repurposing versus like, oh, we found that we really need to remake this to fit
Yeah.
elsewhere. I think that could totally be the case.
Yeah, I feel like that makes the most sense because I think like, something I was sort of getting at earlier is like video, as someone who makes video, and I'm pretty much the only one who kind of makes video at our company, like it does take a lot of effort. And so if you are a company who's like considering jumping into video more fully and you don't have someone who's working full time on that, like it's hard to ask someone to, be making videos for every single platform straight from the jump. So I think, yeah, that's like you kind of just have to jump in and be okay with some, I don't know, flops, honestly, and just kind of like, I don't know, getting used to it. And then I think you can at least get an idea of like, oh yeah, video is going to work for us. Then it's easier to be like, okay, let's invest in hiring someone for this, um, or at least giving ourselves more time to, focus on this. I think that's always the thing. Like, I think we see a lot of this data, right? Like companies are more and more going to invest in video, but like it's easy to say that, but you kind of actually have to like start somewhere. And I think a lot of companies are just afraid to do that because of money and time. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think straight up repurposing is like a good first spot to attempt video as an anchor medium. And then you can then go to, the atomization, like once you feel that this is a worthy investment. Personally, I think that makes sense.
Quickly kind of recap. So first case, I think, for video is like it's probably the best medium, we would argue, for sort of building out like a content engine where content works in a lot of different places and not one channel. I think the second case, this one's a little bit more specific. I think it applies specifically to a certain type of company, but so I think like the B2B, right? B2B sort of, at least from our experience in terms of our customers and sort of just where we see brands doing really interesting things with video. Like video is such a massive sort of channel and sort of like marketing investment that I want to sort of narrow down on, like when we talk about organic video or video that doesn't necessarily have to have paid behind it in order to succeed. I think you're going to see a lot more sort of B2B brands or business to business brands be successful there. So I come from, previous role was at Shopify, and certainly with e-commerce, like video, again, another essential. It's the premier channel, but it usually is invested in via paid. So paid ads, video creative that's then like amplified with paid. But I think like a lot of companies, like a surprising number of companies, get pretty far with their investment in video without like any paid investment, any paid sort of additional investment at all. Kapwing, honestly, a pretty great example of this, where the YouTube channel, this show that you're watching now, our short form, like very minimal paid investment, and in some cases actually zero for certain channels, paid investment. And yet it's still like we're still able to create a nice level of growth there. So that's important context, because I think another reason that video is like is an exceptional channel to invest in is when you really need like expert-led content. And so I think that there's a nice pairing there of like, okay, B2B tends to get a little bit more out of their organic video without a paid investment. And then two, B2B sells into these like more sophisticated buyers they often sell into like teams where they need not only like the end user, but then the buyer of the product, which is sometimes a different person entirely. And then there's like stakeholders too, of people that need to be consulted before the team invests, a significant amount of money into a new, business software or something. So you need to talk to people. In order to sell to those folks, you need to talk to like experts. It's like frankly unreasonable to expect the content or social team to not only be great at their job, which is hard enough, but to then also like moonlight as the sort of like as your customer, right? And
Yeah.
that's especially true when you get into kind of like, especially technical products or products where, a sort of director level or just like a team lead level person is really the buyer. Because imagine, I mean, you're selling, cybersecurity software into a director of cybersecurity. There's just no way for your marketers to like have that level of experience just sitting to the side, like unreasonable. So
Yeah.
what do they have to do? They have to go out and they have to talk to a sort of similar type of person in order to make the content in the first place, right? Now, yes, like you absolutely can do this and you should do this for text first content as well. You could speak to people, you could transcribe the conversation, or you could just rework the interview contents into something more kind of editorial in style. But it's like, as we just covered, that often feels like such a waste nowadays. For certain customer case studies and stuff, I think it could still be fine to think like text first for like, I'm going to have this conversation with this expert in our space, and text is really all I'm looking to get out of this. But if you're doing the hard work of like finding someone that your customer sort of will respond to and trust, that's also a great voice for the thing that you're trying to talk about. They have something to say for the content that you're trying to make. And then in a lot of cases, like the challenge is like actually booking them too. If they're a very senior person and you're talking to them in order to sort of cover a certain topic or to produce some kind of thought leadership. I mean, scheduling a lot of times with these folks is tough. They're very busy. So to come out of all that investment, all of that upfront work, and to not have like the video recording of your conversation it's getting to be like a tougher and tougher sell, or just like people are beginning to question, like, why would we do that? Why would we lose out? Why don't we just take a little bit more work up front and maybe come a little bit more prepared, and then leave the conversation with a recorded video that we can then we can do like as described. We can publish it almost its raw format, like slightly edited longer form to a channel. Or we could skip that step and literally just go to clips. So we have this like really expert level person, a person that's hard to get. They don't often share this kind of advice. We got them. We have an incredible source. And now we have like 24 clips from that conversation of them talking about stuff that like we really want to use to like reach our target customer. So I think like this is kind of like flying under the radar for a lot of companies, or maybe like it's starting to catch on a bit, but it's been something that a lot of brands overlooked, which is like, if you need expert led content, you need to talk to somebody. And if you're going to talk to somebody, you should probably do it with video. It really sort of connects with our previous point, which is like, because you have so many more places that you can now use this, versus, a transcript that you post to the blog and like 200 people see,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think like ultimately easier said than done, but like I don't know. I feel like if a lot of companies just take some notes from like influencers or content creators, like just treat yourself like you're a content creator, like all of this makes more sense. Like, if you treat your video presence and you need experts, just like treat it like a podcast, have an interesting conversation with someone. You're getting like organic content, number one. Hopefully you're having a recognizable face, which will help with clips and marketing. Like it makes a lot of sense. And just because it's like for a B2B company, it doesn't have to be boring. I think that's like a trap that like a lot of marketers at B2B companies fall into is like, not that they want it to be boring, but like that it has to be super professional.
Right.
But I think people often forget that like professionals that you're trying to reach also are like just consumers of media regularly. And so, yeah, they want that entertaining, interesting part, which I think video definitely, personally, I think video gives you more of, just gives you better insight into the people in your industry. You get more context from watching someone speak and listening to them speak. So yeah, I feel like definitely agree. It's just like take a note from some podcasters, you know?
Yeah. It's a great point, and it really, again, I think it highlights the contrast between like B2B and B2C, which is like in B2C, you talking to an expert, it just has less influence. Like a lot of
Yeah.
times UGC, like actual people, like people using the product is way more convincing, way more effective. Or just, it's a product that people can presumably, and most consumer products are not super high levels of investment, or they're one-time purchases in a lot of cases. It's something that somebody can just make a decision on. Like, yep, I've been looking for something like that. Click. Versus B2B, like it's a much longer buying process. You have to have people sort of believe in your point of view. You have to sort of address like the pain points that they're thinking about collectively as a team. So I think the way I would sort of TLDR that is like B2B content marketing must be sort of like multiplayer. It cannot just be like try to nab the person in one go, or you cannot really do it yourself all that often. Like your internal team obviously can be a big part of your video creation strategy, but if you want to expand beyond your internal team's knowledge, you have to go talk to experts. And if you're going to go talk to experts, you might as well record it, and you might as well make it video first, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think also like it's not just, to your point, like it's a longer buying process usually when you're buying, a big enterprise package. And so yeah, like one video isn't going to convince someone probably to buy in, but like if they are confident that you are creating content that's helpful and interesting frequently, then maybe they're more confident in the product too, because they feel like you are reachable and that your product is digestible, and you're actually bringing value not just with the product but also with just like insights in the industry. So I think that's helpful too.
Yep. B2B requires, I think, tools and training, and not just tools alone. And so expert-led content is really like it's table stakes for sure. Awesome. So I think another really, really sort of important like case to be made for video is actually just like macro kind of shifts happening in the world of like marketing broadly. And I think like I will again reference another bit of data here from HubSpot, who said that like they sort of polled marketing teams, and they found that a lot of companies, or the channel or the sort of like content type that most companies were investing in, the top three actually, short form video was number one, which I think is already pretty revealing. Number two was actually influencer marketing. And then number three was SEO. So I think video is like kind of an obvious component for the first two. Like, of course, influencers are their sort of most important thing that they do is connect with their audience. Almost all of them are investing in video in some way. So if you want to kind of get in front of their audience, there's going to be some kind of video element to that. Short form video, again, kind of just like obvious in terms of like video's connection there. But I think like something I would bring up is like SEO. So SEO might seem like a full disconnect from video. Now, I think it's interesting for us to comment on this, because we actually kind of sit at the intersection of honestly all three of these like kind of channels. Like Kapwing, in addition to investing like really heavily in video, like we do rely on search quite a bit. And this is a conversation for another time, but for those listening who work in marketing or in growth, like a big reason that we do that is our product is you're able to use it, or you're able to use major portions of it without even creating an account. And so that means like there's a lot of like different use case pages that we can put up to kind of do like one single job that you would like to do in an editor. And that's a great sort of approach to SEO, right? So we rely on SEO too. And I think like, what I kind of see happening is like SEO and content are like the marketing channels going through the biggest kind of shifts and changes, I think, right now. And one of the reasons I think that really matters is that like SEO is still even more so than video in many cases. It's still like the best, or in some would argue the only feasible, like ultra scalable organic channel, right? So video, very scalable. Like you create great videos that get a lot of reach. It's insanely scalable, but SEO takes it a step further in that like you do have to invest in like updating pages and so on and so forth, but it's way more kind of like steady state. The drop off of successful SEO is not nearly as sort of severe as the drop off with videos, where like, we have a big YouTube channel as well. We get a lot of views coming in from like content that we created, months and years in the past. It's not quite as compounding though as SEO. Like if we were to have the channel slow down significantly, or if we were to just kind of like drop off from making videos generally, our sort of old content archive would not carry the torch, would not really like be putting in as much work as like, a set of pages that are performing really well in SEO. Like those can kind of keep rolling without too much investment, unless competitors come in and really try to like oust you out of that position. I say all that to say like, but, but wait, there's more. Like SEO is starting to really like, it's starting to highlight, it's starting to push users towards video. It's starting to basically take a bet on video being what a user actually wanted to see. And this is like evident through what we sort of call the search engine results page. This is typically called the SERP. And in more and more searches, we're seeing this firsthand. Like more and more searches are actually showing a video intent, which is like Google is putting a video either at the top. They're just like, we're not actually going to send people to a web page for this search. We're just going to put a video up here at position 1. Or if they're being a little more conservative with that SERP, the video section in Google search results, some of you have probably seen, there's like a videos call out section in addition to like people also asked and other kind of like sections that they add to the SERP. That section is being sort of brought up. So meaning it's like previously maybe it was the video section was after position 8. And for a lot of SERPs, we're now seeing it like above position 5, like really being given a lot of real estate in the organic results, right? And then I think those are the sort of more obvious like changes. Like anyone working in SEO, you've seen that happen. Like you're paying attention to that. So you're trying to maybe pair up video and on-site content like way more consistently. We, for instance, invest in creating videos that help kind of explain certain features, and then we embed them onto the feature page so that when a user lands on this like kind of SEO focused landing page, there's also a really great video kind of there waiting for them to kind of explain like, how do you actually do this? Like you showed up here because you wanted to trim a video quickly or resize it. Well, here's like an explanation on how to actually do it.
Right.
Which, is great for time on page. It's great for people kind of to, discovering it in the SERP when Google is highlighting the video. But I think like the dark horse here, the change that like people are noticing, but they're not nearly giving enough credence to, is that people are skipping Google when they want a video as an answer. So
yeah, absolutely.
It's not actually like the bigger sort of change potentially is like not actually like I'm going to my traditional search engine and that search engine's algorithm is rewarding video more. That is important. But a lot of it's just like actually the person is saying like, I would like a video to this answer that I have. And I'm going to go to TikTok or Instagram Reels. I'm just going to skip the actual traditional search engine altogether. and go to a video first platform and then run the search, right? So
Yeah.
that I think is like a hugely, hugely interesting change. And Jack, I would love, your take personally, because I can talk about this too, but like, even in your own behavior, like, do you find yourself doing that more often? Like, why do you think people are kind of like, why are they going video first? Like, why are they skipping Google these days in some cases?
Yeah. I mean, I think I have, yeah, noticed in my behavior, even before we really started talking about this, we talked a little bit about this last episode too, but
Hmm.
I completely skipped Google pretty much, and I
A
have been
lot of
for a
stuff.
long time.
Yeah.
First, it was Reddit, and it still is. I always pretty much, and that's not video first, but even for text content,
Yeah.
I tend to skip Google because I think sort of what we've been talking about, like a lot of this SEO content is, it just feels like inorganic. It feels overly branded, and it feels like a sales pitch rather than a helpful resource. And I think that's the difference between things like Reddit and also TikTok and Instagram. I often go on TikTok for searching things, um, especially for searching things that are like pop culture related or um, things like that. Like I actually kind of feel like the TikTok like search algorithm like works faster than Google too.
Mm.
Like oftentimes I'll be searching on YouTube or on Google for something that's like kind of niche, and it won't be able, or kind of new and niche, and it won't be able to like figure out what I'm looking for, but then
Yeah.
TikTok like finds it every time.
Yeah.
And so I think it's also about the speed. I think because like you said, like SEO is good because it's like long lasting and you build up this sort of credibility and these pages continue to last. But I think to its detriment, like it doesn't reward new content necessarily as much, potentially. And I think like TikTok does.
I completely agree. I also think like, again, I think this is something people are catching on to, but is still sort of pretty overlooked, is like, even for work topics though, like even for kind of more, I'll say the word technical, but just more professional, maybe based topics. A lot of times I find myself thinking I should go to a video first because as someone who works in marketing, um, like I am predicting that if I go to Google, I will just hit some brands SEO, like
Yeah.
highly overly optimized, frankly, content that's going to like have the what is in the H2 and just be really generic to try to capture like a lot of the like long tail traffic. And also, like, again, this is brands, they've done this to themselves in a sense. I assume that it's going to be biased. Like I'm going to
Yeah.
find the product CTA in the middle of this, and they're only going to really tell me the way to do it with their product, which is a tough trade-off. I mean, I understand brands do this because like it can increase the conversion rates on the page, but I think we also have to pay attention to like, well, that's pushing some people to just like skip even looking at a brand solution to it altogether because they've been burned too many times with just like, I really just want someone's like authentic kind of like how they actually do it.
Yeah.
And so I think that also kind of makes the interesting point of like, creators and individuals more associated with video than brands doing great video. Honestly, I would say broadly. And so a lot of my searches start with like actually both of those factors where it's like, I want to skip the brand because I'm not trusting that they're going to be impartial or that they're just going to be too overly salesy and like pitching me the product too hard instead of trying to solve the problem directly. And then
Mhm.
number two, I also just want to find a creator who is going to sort of show me like, this is what I actually do. So like
Yeah.
if someone were looking, they were looking up for, they were searching for solutions to like content strategy or the landing pages that we talked about, they would potentially want to get it from like me. And so I would show you like, the spreadsheet that I use for this or the template, or for video production, like for producing videos for Kapwing's shows, like they would want to see how do you, Jack, like actually approach it. So like brands could certainly do a lot better job of just like letting the individuals in their company that are going to be creating the content like really actually get like really be sort of transparent and focus more sort of solving the problem for people rather than pushing the sales pitch too hard. But there's this broader reputation thing where like even if an individual company were to do that, people just have this perception now of like the first 10 links in that Google search result are just all marketers like
Yeah,
grabbing
exactly.
for my, grabbing for my dollars. Whereas like video, still seems a little more like authentic, organic. I feel like even if a brand is maybe creating it, I'm going to see the person's face and I'm going to see them
Yeah,
walking me through it, So
I think it's like with video, you place more emphasis on sort of like, authorship.
yes.
With written content and SEO, you're like trusting sort of this amalgamous like entity who you have no idea who this person actually is. You
Yeah.
don't even know, like for instance, like if I was looking up a video solution, like, how do I add subtitles or whatever? Like, I don't even know if the person who wrote this knows how to make video. Like, and so
Yeah.
I think there's some like credibility from seeing someone's face and watching them do the task that you're looking for rather than
Yes.
just trusting this company,
Yeah. I like you'll see actually with that point, like you'll see brands like Google's sort of EAT guidelines, if folks have heard of that. You'll see brands invest in these like extremely descriptive like author bylines to try to like to try to give people the sense of like, no, this is an expert or an expert definitely reviewed this. And no matter how no matter how sincere or trustworthy that actually is for a particular brand, in the back of your mind, you're kind of always like, but really though?
Yeah.
but did they really though? And
Yeah.
then with a video, it's just like there's no question. Like someone's gonna like walk you through like, here's how I do here's how I do cohort analysis for the startup that I work at. And they're just literally showing like them going through it with like the exact stuff that they use. You no longer really have that hesitation. Whereas like written content is always going to have this like perceived veil of like they're hiding something from me or they have like ulterior motives. Which is,
I mean,
it's
I
tough,
think
but it's
also even in a product demonstration with video, at least you can see that the task actually can be completed, even if you're being
Yes.
sold something a little bit. Like
yes.
with text, it's like you actually don't have any proof that like you're going to get the outcome that you want. And so I think that's aggravating.
Like here's hoping the screenshot in your blog post really is what I'll see when I get in here.
Exactly.
That's great. Great point. So that I think is a really critical one. I would say as a final point, and I'll keep this one short because I think this is a little more of our personal point of view. It's something that we've kind of at Kapwing have started to kind of lean into and believe more so, especially as like these AI sort of tools get better and better. Like Kapwing's AI suite is like really fantastic for people who want to kind of get started with creation, but maybe need a little bit of an assist. But I think that the last reason I think video could be a really critical anchor medium going forward is that like previously, I do think that there was like a production hurdle. There was like a creation hurdle, right? And I can say this as someone who's been, kind of publishing to the web, for long enough that I was doing it even before sort of like really turnkey blogging platforms were available. And, nowadays you can I have this thing that I've written down. I can get it on a website like Medium or Twitter or anywhere in like basically 2 clicks. Like I'm just going to take it out of the doc. Even if I have to create the account from scratch, now we're talking a whole meaty 6 clicks to get to the end result of like create my Medium account, paste the content into it and press publish. And now my text is live on the internet. Like, boom. Yeah. It's beautiful. Video was still kind of in that like, HTML. I got to create an HTML web page phase, like the equivalent of it, because, we didn't have like, we haven't always sort of had exceptional cameras like readily available to us. Whereas nowadays, if you have a smartphone created even in the past like couple years, you have a really, really amazing sort of camera, at least versus, years past. It's certainly like, it's very usable. All sort of modern phone cameras are really just like all that you need in most cases.
Yeah.
And then there's like the actual like, yes, YouTube has been around for quite a while, but there have been kind of like quality of life improvements even for like the actual video platforms themselves, especially in regards to like it getting it distributed to the right people. Like I think really that is what's kind of has been the biggest evolution for the platforms is like if you upload it here, we can actually maybe show it to the right people, whether it's like you're actually paying for it with targeted advertising or just like the algorithm finds people who have clicked on kind of similar topics in the past and we'll get it in front of them. And then of course, like we have to mention this part of it, like producing video isn't just recording the footage and the audio. It's like you do have to edit, you do have to polish it, you do have to sort of like structure it. And yes, like I'm not going to complain about hard sales pitches and pitch people too hard on Kapwing here, but certainly like online editors have played a big role in lowering that sort of barrier too, because now you don't even need a really heavyweight computer or some sort of bloated or super heavyweight like editing program. If you want to make simple, crisp, clean edits and publish, you can actually do that online in your browser. Now, all that said, I shouldn't. I mean, how can I forget actually? Like, and then you have AI, which is just like,
I was about to say that. Like, you don't even really know. You don't even have to have much time anymore.
In the future, like this has been definitely talked about a lot, but it's like in the future, you may not need footage, right? And what kind of world does that look like? And so AI is blowing the doors off of like the last remaining hurdles of video creation, right? Now, I think that has to like be set up as a contrast to, but that's not going to assure that you create great video that resonates with the people that actually buy your product. Like, this is not like me offering an olive branch to creatives either in terms of like, oh, don't worry about AI, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't think that they should, but I think like it's actually what brands are really, really seeing is that like what determines the success of the video is still ultimately going to hinge on like the angle that we took, the substance, the material of the video itself, right? Do we actually understand who we wanted to see this? Like, did we actually understand the intended audience well enough and what they care about and what challenges they're up against or what they're interested in? Like, those are still the X factor for what makes a successful video. But now the brands and the marketers that are able to figure that out no longer, or they have much less of a hurdle in terms of like, oh God, but how do we create the video? Like they can spend potentially, I would say in the future, this will definitely be the case. I would say now it's like beginning to be the case. They could potentially spend like the majority or like all of the time in some cases on that work, on sort of like, again, audience is like, well, you can't have the right audience if you don't know who you want in the seats, because just anybody coming to, just anybody sitting down is not gonna work. You do need people who are eventually going to buy, or for whom your product is relevant at all. Then you need to understand what they want to see. Then you need to understand what kind of ideas are really going to connect and resonate. And then you need to have the creativity to actually like, bring a format or a series or individual content type to life. And again, what's actually been getting easier though is the actual production. So the sort of creative concept, the creative strategy, the strategy overall for your video, still very human first. I do think like it, if not always will be, if we're talking like how many timeline, how long of a timeline are we talking? 1,000 years? I don't know. I won't be around to worry about that. And like, but I don't think in any near future, there's any risk of like humans being taken out of that really critical part of the equation. But I do think like less of the tedious sort of grunt work of video production and editing. People can lean on the tech more, and then all the other stuff that we benefited from, we've sort of talked about, like the hosting, the actual equipment being way more accessible and turnkey. All of that will continue to get easier. So you'll sort of have that shift, I think, continue to happen and maybe even accelerate. So that I think is like, that's important to bring up, because if everyone is able to make video, if it's easier for everyone to make video, but still very hard to make the right video or to make the right video that is then performant for the business, that makes video still a very, very strong medium to create, like to use as your anchor medium.
Mhm.
Meaning like, yes, it will get easier to create videos, but don't worry about being sort of like, um, I guess like, don't worry about video, sort of losing its value because it's easier for people to get the videos up and online.
Yeah.
You're going to see a lot of companies like invest the wrong way. They absolutely will. They'll up their production in video, but they won't think about the strategic element of it. And so I think in a lot of cases, like with text content, we've seen like, yes, there's more blogs than ever. There's more sort of writing on the internet than ever, but the people that do it extremely well are bigger than they've ever been. They have more
Yeah.
reach than they've ever had. They have more impact than they've ever had because there is so much noise that anyone who actually creates signal is like, they get everyone to pay attention to them because people are it's so drowned out with all this like really low effort content. And
Yeah.
so that has absolutely happened in writing where like the big Substacks are very big. The big Twitter thread writers are very big. The big bloggers and essayists are very big. They have audiences bigger than they've ever had, even though
Yeah.
there's more writing content than ever. And video, it's going to go the same exact way, in my opinion. So that I think is like,
Completely.
yeah, that I think is the final thing people need to think about with video being like that central like nexus of their content strategy,
Yeah, and I think that experience is also learned. Like, you can't expect yourself to be the greatest, video creator of all time until you've spent a lot of
Week
time.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, like you need to experiment with that. Um, and so I think like, yeah, you need to also view, to our point of the anchor medium, you need to view this as like a long-term strategy, a long-term bet, sort of. You're not going to probably create one amazing video, your first video, and like hit it big, and that's going to like drive 1 million users to your, to sign up
Yeah.
for your product. It's
Yeah.
more of a long-term learning strategy that you kind of need to invest in.
Yep.
So
I completely agree. Cause again, I mentioned the folks that are sort of reaping the benefits of, again, like text content being kind of the precursor, I think, or like the preview of what's going to happen with video. They've been around for a while. Like nobody really breaks, like the challenge I think really is like breaking onto the scene nowadays for text content. It's very tough. Like that's actually where the volume of what's being created is a challenge. It's like, it's actually getting that first initial bit of traction is much harder now. And so with video, the opportunity is like, it still hasn't become saturated enough that early traction is like impossible, right?
Yeah.
It's not impossible with text either. Like it's always possible if you mix a bit of luck with like really, really, hard work and a sort of unique sort of approach and take. But with video, you can get your foot in the door now before this explosion of like new videos sort of happens as a result of AI. And then you're much better positioned to then say, okay, we've got enough of a snowball rolling here that if we become world class at pairing the videos we create with our customer problems, we're going to win big. Because if if we keep showing up and if video sort of keeps growing in terms of like the people that prefer it, the people that watch video, there's still a ton of like headspace, headroom to kind of grow. You're going to win big. Like you're going to be there early enough that you can sort of ride that wave up versus like, I never like to fear monger about channels, but it's like, again, if you just watch kind of like how text content has evolved, in a couple years, you may find yourself in kind of the situation that writers find themselves in today, which is like, if you're starting an audience from scratch purely on text now, it's like very hard. Like I was able, like, and I'll say this like with my own personal experience of like the stuff that I was writing about in 2010, or really maybe sort of the quality of what I was putting out like over a decade ago was kind of bad. It was like, it wasn't great, but it was like, there were so few people doing it back then, or like, at least compared to today, I was able to get the kind of traction that I don't think a person who was producing the same level of quality could get today. It would need to be way better. And I think we're going to run into that situation with video because that just seems to be how the trend line works. Like the more popular a format, a style, a medium gets, the bigger you can ultimately get. The successful people can get way bigger than they ever were in the past, but the harder it is to go from like 0 to 1. So, you know, in 10 years time, even in 5 years time, I don't want to have been like, I don't want to really be looking at video for the first time. I don't want to be looking at a
No,
serious investment in video for the first time. I want to have already been there, you know? So
completely.
last call
Yeah.
might
So
be.
get to it. Get to
Yeah.
it, or else you will be sorry.
This is like at the train station where they're doing last call. Like you got to get on
Yeah.
board or it could
Seriously.
really, it could shift here and not in your favor in the future. So
Totally. So with that, good luck. Make a TikTok. Let's get to it. See what happens. Yeah, I think, you know, it's kind of one of those things where it's like everyone kind of knows that video is important, but they need to really know. Like
yeah.
really let it settle that video
Yeah.
is that important.
Yeah. And I think that the evidence is out there. Hopefully, like we've given folks watching today, like, you know, some interesting, you know, ideas to explore here or some interesting evidence in terms of like why. But it ultimately is up to you. It's ultimately up to you to look at the business, your marketing strategy, and the content strategy that's going to best support the business and determine whether or not video needs to be a part of it. But I just think more and more the answer is going to be default yes. And more
Yeah.
than default yes, the answer is going to be yes. And video should actually be the heart of our content strategy. So we'll see.
Absolutely. Well, great. Thanks for watching, everyone. Greg, thanks for leading this and sharing your thoughts
Oh,
today.
of course.
Come back to the Jack and Greg show / the show with no name next week. Still working out the title.
Yeah.
But
And
maybe one day we'll figure it out and you'll be there. You'll be the first to know.
yes, I would say two things too. You know, if you'd like to reach out to either of us about like how your brand is approaching video questions, like please do so. And if you have an idea for the show name, I mean, you know, drop them in the comments and you will get a shout
Yeah.
out the next time if we use one. So
Completely. Awesome.
all right.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.